Radical feminists see the oppression of women as being achieved through multiple institutions, which include marriage, the family, sexual intercourse, love, religion, and prostitution. In The Dialectic of Sex, published in 1970, Shulamith Firestone takes on a cluster of these: marriage, the family, sexual intercourse, and love, by focusing on women's role in the family. 1970 was a great year in feminist history. Not only was Shulamith's The Dialectic of Sex published, but so too were Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch and Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, as well as the second round of essays collected in Notes from the Second Year. In my personal reading of The Dialectic of Sex, for whatever that's worth, the most interesting chapters are 1 to 3 and 10. Chapter 1, which shares a title with the book, sets up how she thinks about patriarchy and women's oppression. Chapter 2, called On American Feminism, gives a history of feminist movement and a typology of different kinds of feminists. The typology is quite helpful, distinguishing conservative feminists working for legal equality from politicos, as women whose primary allegiance is to the left, but working against sexism within the left, and distinguishing both of these from radicals. Women, and I quote, for whom neither conservative bureaucratic feminism nor warmed over leftist dogma had much appeal. And these women are interested in a revolutionary solution to the problem of the sex class system. Chapter 3 is called Freudianism, the Misguided Feminism. And in this chapter, she talks about Freud's views of women's sexuality and gives a feminist rereading of Freudian theory, complete with a reinterpretation of penis envy as women's perfectly rational envy of man's superior social position. Chapter 10 is called The Ultimate Revolution, Demands and Speculations, and it sets out some of Shulamith's vision for a feminist future. I'm going to focus in this video on chapters 1 and 10, the chapters that sandwich all the rest. Chapter 1 opens with the line, "Sex class is so deep as to be invisible." She means that sex inequality is utterly pervasive, thought to go all the way down into the fundamentals of our biology, that it, and I quote, pervades all culture, history, economics, nature itself. To achieve feminist revolution, we need a thorough understanding of the history, how what she calls the sex war arose and evolved. So she borrows the method from Marx and Engels to do this, taking what they did for class and doing it for sex. So this requires looking for the origins of the sex class system and trying to understand the mechanisms of that system throughout history, so as to end up in the position of knowing how to dismantle that system. So the new move she's proposing is a materialist view of sex, which means a view rooted in organic causes rather than a view of class. There is some discussion in the chapter of the extent to which Beauvoir tried this and I quote, overshot her mark, which I won't go into here, but if you're interested, it's on page 8 of chapter 1. Shulamith's proposal is that it's the sexual division itself that is the material basis of sex inequality and the start or origin of women's oppression. This means the biological difference between women and men. She writes, sex class sprang directly from a biological reality. Men and women were created different and not equal. Shulamith says that while the difference alone did not lead to hierarchy, the functions tied to the differences did. So that is, women's biological difference from men leads to her having the function of reproducing the species, while men's biological difference from women does not. In history, this difference in function meant that, and I quote again, the biological family is an inherently unequal power distribution. So she saw 4 fundamental facts as characterizing the family. First, being at the continual mercy of their biology made women dependent on men for survival, physical survival. This includes things like menstruation, menopause, childbirth, breastfeeding, and child rearing. Second, children are dependent on adults for a longer period compared to other animals. Third, that the mother-child interdependence exists in some form in every society, and I quote again, has shaped the psychology of every mature female and every infant. And then fourth, that reproductive differences between men and women led to the first division of labor, and this was the origin of class, meaning the origin of separation of humans into groups, and this division provided the paradigm for caste, understood as discrimination based on biological characteristics. So she's saying that sex divisions are the first inequality and provided the template for all later group-based hierarchy. So there have been ongoing wars between academics and activists over which system of oppression is fundamental, between race, sex, and class, although some people today have given up on a claim of fundamentality and are content with just saying this is a form of oppression that matters. But this Shulamith's view is an example of the claiming of fundamentality, which overturns others' claims, here deliberately overturning the claims of Marx and Engels. So if we were just animals, then there might not be much more to say about this sex inequality, but Shulamith points out, as a species, we do not simply submit to nature, rather we take control over it. So we're not consigned to simply accepting sex inequality. So simply describing an origin of the sex class system in nature does nothing to vindicate it. She thought that in a parallel move to class revolution, where the proletariat were directed to seize the means of production, women must revolt against their oppression by seizing control of reproduction. This meant claiming full control over their own bodies, but also seizing control of human fertility, in which she included, and I quote again, the new population biology, as well as all the social institutions of childbearing and child rearing. She saw the end goal as being the elimination of the sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. So in this respect, just like T-Grace, she aimed at the sex distinction itself rather than what followed from it socially. So rather than imagining ways in which women's biological differences could be accommodated such that she faces no loss of opportunities or freedoms, Firestone instead imagines those biological differences away, literally making men and women the same in terms of function. So her imagined solution to sex inequality was technological, in particular artificial reproduction. She wrote, the division of labor would be ended by the elimination of labor altogether through cybernetics. The tyranny of the biological family would be broken. So in chapter 10, she argues further in favor of this solution. She says, pregnancy is barbaric. Pregnancy is the temporary deformity of the body of the individual for the sake of the species. It hurts. Here's a fun passage where Shulamith imagines a conversation between a friend of hers who just gave birth and the cult of natural childbirth. Like shitting a pumpkin, a friend of mine told me when I inquired about the great experience you're missing. What's wrong with shitting? Shitting can be fun, says the school of the great experience. It hurts, she says. What's wrong with a little pain as long as it doesn't kill you, answers the school. It is boring, she says. Pain can be interesting as an experience, says the school. Isn't that a rather high price to pay for interesting experience, she says. But look, you get a reward, says the school. A baby all your own to fuck up as you please. Well, that's something, she says. But how do I know it will be male like you? If all these things are true, and about pregnancy, and there's an alternative, it stands to reason we should take it. Freedom from childbearing and child rearing becomes the first of Shulamith's revolutionary demands. So she states this as the freeing of women from the tyranny of reproduction by every means possible, and the diffusion of the child rearing role to the society as a whole, men as well as women. She considers a range of ways to achieve this, from the more practical to the more aspirational, from family planning and 24-hour-a-day daycare centers staffed by both sexes on the one side to artificial reproduction on the other side. And the final chapter has loads of interesting suggestions for the broader feminist revolution, including alternative ways of arranging work and the family structure. So if you're interested, I strongly encourage you to read chapter 10 for yourselves.